I read A Warrior's Knowledge, the second book in the Castes and Outcasts series by Davis Ashura. This is the first time that I've read this book, but I'm going to also talk about its connections to the first book, The Warrior's Path. So if you don't want spoilers for the first book, I guess you shouldn't listen to this. Although it would be weird if you only read the second book. Anyway, this book continues the story of Rook, who was out in the wilderness again at the end of the previous book and needed to go to Jasira's city of Stronghold in order to try and set up a new life, because he's outcast from his home city of Ashoka, where the purebloods live. And so now he's going to live with the outcasts in Stronghold. And so the first step in that whole process is going through the wilderness with Jazira and trying to get there before winter sets in. So like it's getting colder and colder. There's all kinds of dangerous monsters. And this kind of mirrors the first book in its structure, where that book begins with Rook out in the wilderness and then stumbling on Jazira, and they travel together and get to know each other. Now they do know each other, and Rook is grappling with his identity, and their roles are kind of reversed. Jazira is the one who's going to offer him sanctuary in her home city and hospitality and all of that. And Rook is the one who kind of has to wrestle with his existential kind of like situation, right? Where he has to figure out like, who am I now that I don't have my family, now that I don't have my city? What am I going to do with myself? And at the same time, there is this attraction between Rook and Jazira that's always been there since the first time they met. And it's growing stronger between them. But Jazira is engaged to a man back in Stronghold, and Rook has like a lot of integrity and doesn't want to put her in an awkward situation. But nonetheless, those feelings are there, and they are growing stronger. And so they, fight against them. And this is the main source of conflict and drama at this part of the story. The monsters hunting them and they have to fight. And then they hide and have to stay warm at night and cuddle up and then start kissing. And then they're like, no, we must not kiss. And then back out to fight more monsters and on like that, which is all good stuff. It's fine. Good adventure romance story. Just like the first book, there's lots of switching between different points of view and different characters. And we switch back to Rook's home city, Ashoka, where his family is trying to argue with the ruling body to reverse the decision about his exile and like get it so that Rook can come back to Ashoka. And so there's like political maneuvering from his family, and they try to convince various people on the council to vote with them. And at the same time, there continues to be the mystery around the killer who uses the withering knife that is the weapon of Suraith, but someone is using it in Ashoka to commit murders secretly. And it has that like signature way that it desiccates the bodies after the murder, and they're closing in more and more on who the killer is. But also there's like an investigation going on into the very kind of structure of society in Ashoka and how that is causing the situation that does not serve justice, right? Like how Rook is exiled and how everyone hated Jazira because of, her mixed heritage, and on like that. There's like this sense that we get that there are traitors among the council members and that they are working against the interests interests of humanity and kind of like working for Suraith, but also that like the whole structure of society is masking these people from justice while serving out injustice to people who would protect the city and be serving for the good of humanity itself. And so the caste system has been instrumentalized by allies of Suraith for injustice and evil, and that whole thing is being uncovered by Rook's family as he's gone. So we're kind of like jumping back and forth between Stronghold and Ashoka, and Rook's story is kind of like action packed and lots of like fighting and romance and stuff like that. And then there's this more like meditative and political story over here in Ashoka. So you get a good contrast, I think, that helps to not wear us out in either direction of just like, so much slow politics. I wish something would happen, or like action, action, action. And then I'm like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. They're just always fighting. There's never any downtime. This allows Ashura to kind of change things up. And by contrast, it makes the politics better when we take a break from it and get some action, and vice versa, I think. So the book is like well paced in this way. The structure of it feels really nice. And you tend not to get tired of anything. And in fact, you're kind of like, wait a minute, no, let me go back. So you're eager for the next part of the story. And so eventually Rook and Jazeera make it to Stronghold. And it's kind of like a inversion or a mirroring of the previous book where, you know, she comes to Ashura and now Rook gets to see Stronghold. And there's all kinds of things that are different. The biggest differences are that Stronghold is just more bare bones. It's less rich in every way. So like it's just less impressive. It's less advanced. The people are also less welcoming. They're more prejudiced. And the entire society kind of has a prideful kind of narcissism to it, which is to say that like these people were ejected from the pureblood society and had to like scrape out an existence all on their own. And the pureblood society considers what they have achieved totally impossible. And it just, the reason that I say narcissistic, it just kind of reminds me of like a neglected child who ends up, you know, kind of having to raise themselves, and they don't get that attention or love that they need from their parent or the rest of their family. And then, so they have to like give that love to themselves. But there's a real insecurity in that whole thing and a dysfunction that creates narcissistic behavior. So there's nobody there to tell them like, you're doing a good job. I believe in you. I'm so proud of you. So they have to tell it to themselves. And anybody who taps into the kind of insecurity that lies underneath of that pride is going to get a really bad reaction. And so Rook is one of the purebloods that they consider to be like, you know, the neglectful parent who ejected them into the wilderness to die. And here he is among them. Everybody kind of gives him the resentment of like their lives are so hard because his society is not doing the right thing by them and hasn't for however long, like it feels like centuries. And Rook gives them like a lot of grace as far as this goes. Like for one thing, he doesn't have a choice. He's got to like figure out how to make a life in Stronghold because, you know, he's exiled. So he's willing to try and make the best of it. He's willing to do work that would be beneath his caste in Ashura. And so it's not like he's coming at them with an equal amount of pride, is what I mean. And they're all surprised by his humility and kind of won over by it over time. Like he has a lot of integrity. He listens to instructions. He doesn't complain. And it turns out that he has a cousin who already lives there and who was also part of the warrior caste. and he's been badly injured, but he's been making the best of it as well. And so he lives with a guy and he does manual labor instead of being a soldier because his injury kind of prevents him from soldiering. And so he has learned about the culture enough that he kind of like gives Rook a little bit of a leg up and helps to explain to him what's going on, which is, a good way to transmit information naturally to us as readers by having this character there. It also gives somebody to Rook that he cares about and helps to kind of like anchor that whole story for drama because, now he has something to lose there and he has someone who will care about him no matter what because Jazeera is going to get pulled away from him because she has to go back to her family, which she is very happy to be reunited with them, but also with her fiance, who she is less happy to see and turns out to be a huge jerk. So she's been gone for like half a year or something like that and turns back up, and everybody is suspicious. Like, look at this big, handsome, powerful warrior guy from the purebloods. You must have been, Jazeera. Come on. We know what happened. And we as the readers know that that's not fair and it's not true. She wanted to, Rook wanted to, but they didn't. And that kind of counts for even more. Like, it's even more unfair to get in trouble for the thing that you wanted to do, but you didn't do because it was wrong. So it feels doubly unfair the way that she's accused. It's kind of sexist and not great. And she doesn't put up with it. She gets pretty mad about the accusations. And at the same time, she tries to make it work with her fiance and lets him know, like, these are the things that I need from you. I'm not feeling very good about this whole thing. And he's like, I don't care how you feel. How I feel is more important. And basically, she has to break off the engagement with him because he is too much of a jerk for her to see any happiness in their future. And her parents don't want her to do this because it's like, it's a good marriage in terms of her security within the community. It's just like a socially beneficial marriage and all around like a pretty good match on a societal level. And it's like, your personalities, you'll get used to each other over time. Nothing's perfect, but like at this, suck it up and you should get married because it's the right thing to do, quote unquote. And so she has to deal with all that. She can't see Rook very much. Rook is really trying to like avoid her and get out of her life because he can see how his presence is causing her problems in terms of her reputation. And so he puts distance between them for her sake. And this is not great behavior on his part either, because he's kind of like deciding for her what should happen and not really like asking her, do you want some distance from me so that you can get back to your life how you want it? She wants to remain friends. She still cares about him. She's having a lot of integrity about her feelings and her boundaries. And Rook is not. He's not doing that. He's just doing like, quote unquote, the right thing. At the same time, Jazeera's fiance is sending thugs and assassins to beat up or kill Rook. And so every once in a while, like as he's trying to get a job as a manual laborer or just like, trying to get a meal at night or something, people show up to try to kill him. And he is badly injured. One of his arms is so hurt that he can't use it at all. He has some broken ribs. That is all stuff that happened in the wilderness before they got there. And he is healing from all of that. And so he has to kind of like fight one-handed. But, this is the protagonist of the adventure fantasy, Rook, and he can fight one-handed. Like, it's not a problem. But it is annoying. And he tells the local authorities, like, here's what's happening. I'm being targeted and people are trying to kill me. And these are the guys who did it. And they're like, we don't care. We're not going to prosecute anybody. We're not going to do anything about it. And this, more than anything else, makes him angry and kind of like realize that he's never going to be good enough for these people. He's never going to be able to make a life in this place because it's fundamentally unfair. Okay, so a peek behind the curtain here. I recorded that part that you just heard on like a Tuesday, and then now it is Sunday of the next week. And basically we had like a family emergency and didn't get the chance to record the rest of the second book. But in the meantime, I read the third book. And so I don't want to try to pretend like that's not influencing my take on things. And like I recorded that part like right after I had finished the second book. And then I was going to work some more on my shift. And then like on my lunch hour, maybe hop back on my phone and wrap up my thoughts on the second book. And then move on to the third book, in a couple of days or however long it took me to get there. But what ended up happening instead was that I had a family emergency and just had to run around all week dealing with that. So basically, the rest of A Warrior's Knowledge involves Rook going to Stronghold and learning about Jazira's society and seeing that they are kind of hypocritical, and he becomes resentful because of the attempts on his life and the lack of justice in the society, while Jazira has to kind of grapple with the fact that her society is more brutal and kind of less evolved than Rook's society. But at the same time, it's also more free in certain ways, or more open to change in certain ways. And so there are kind of like advantages and disadvantages to Stronghold versus Ashoka, but overall, it seems like Stronghold is kind of the inferior society, and Rook is not going to be welcome in either society. And something that like I didn't realize when I was reading the first book was this idea that there are oases in the world and that they provide a kind of supernatural safety. I thought it was just literally like an oasis with, fertile land and fresh water in the midst of this like wasteland full of monsters. But there's like a supernatural element to it that prevents the evil forces from getting into the boundaries of these cities. And so that's why humanity has been able to survive so long. But it kind of also isolates them from each other. And so that's a thing that's going on. And then also, I didn't mention that like there's the reason that Rook is able to heal has to do with like these cat-like creatures who kind of bonded with him that are a lot of fun. I really like those characters and the approach that they have to humanity. They're very funny, but also like really cool and powerful. A really cool supernatural fantasy kind of race of beings. All of that to say that like Stronghold doesn't have this oasis, and it's not like associated with any of these powerful cat monster things either. The only way that they have been able to survive is kind of by their own power and wits and careful hiding that they have been doing for a long time. I think like more than 100 years. So that's like a huge achievement, and they should be proud of what their society has been able to do. There was like not a whole lot of people, and now they've grown to a city of like more than 40,000 people. And so this also makes them very vulnerable to attack, though. And when we switch back to Saraith's point of view, we can see that she is distributing her madness more effectively among her Chimera followers and taking the time where she gets to have her full sanity to plan how she's going to destroy humanity. And we can see that the desires that she has around destroying humanity don't make a whole lot of logical sense. They're not deeply motivated by some kind of trauma that happened or kind of instrumental in achieving some secondary or primary goal, I should say, where humanity's destruction is kind of secondary to a process that she's trying to achieve. Instead, it seems like a malicious and hateful action that has something to do with like a deeper either moral sickness or maybe a supernatural infection that happened to her from her use of the withering knife. And so the mystery that has surrounded that whole thing in Ashura, or Ashoka, sorry, the city that Rook is from, I think kind of parallels in many ways Rook's story, where there's this couple who want to be together, but they can't because of the rules, the strict way of the purebloods in Ashoka, and the ways that society is kind of holding them back from their desire for each other. And so they use the knife to kill key people and be together as a couple. So it's this man and woman who are doing this. And then I think that also contrasts with another couple who, besides Rook and Jazeera, who want to be together, but they shouldn't be because of the rules of society, and they forego their relationship in order to obey the rules of society, and it makes them really unhappy, but at the same time, it helps them to fit in better. And I think that the story is kind of like on their side, that they made the right choice, but it's also more on the side of Rook and Jazeera that their choice is really the right choice as they grow closer and closer to each other romantically over the course of this second book. So there's kind of a spectrum there that the book is laying out of unacceptable behavior or bad behavior, moderate behavior, and then ideal behavior in terms of Rook and Jazeera. And the knife is on the side of the kind of bad or evil side of that spectrum. And it seems like when you kill with the withering knife, it somehow splinters the consciousness or soul of the individual and then inserts that consciousness into your mind as the murderer. And so for the rest of your life, you'll have some aspect of your victim always talking directly into your thoughts and like interrupting your thoughts and intruding in your interior existence. And that seems to be what's happening to Saraith. Like we saw that in the first book, that she is having conversations with her mother and father, and that this is not merely like some kind of insanity, but it's a supernatural effect of the withering knife itself. So it kind of victimizes the person who victimizes others. And so there's a kind of karma to the whole thing, that the violent act causes its own punishment to happen. In any case, Rook wants to join the military, but he's not really going to be given a very fair chance. And so to him, he's just like, whatever, I can't control the way that other people perceive me, so I'm just going to do my best in this competition to be accepted, and I'm not fully healed, but whatever. I'm sure that I'm better than all of these other warriors because of my special pureblood training as a Kama, and on like that. And so he doesn't want to be accepted into Stronghold Society anymore because they have been so unfair to him. And at the same time, he wants to beat them up in the competition to prove to everyone that he is deserving of dignity and respect, I think, but not trying to abase himself in order to receive that respect. And so basically he does win the competition, and all through this, like, him and Jazeera are not really talking to each other because he thinks that that's the best thing for her. And at the same time, more and more, she is learning that her fiance is a huge jerk who doesn't deserve her time, and they end up breaking up. And she watches the competition and she sees Rook win his whole thing very easily because of his superior fighting prowess. And she's proud of him, but hurt that their relationship is like so messed up. And everybody in Stronghold, after they see how powerful Rook is, kind of changes their tune, and they're like, oh man, nobody ever should have been so mean to you. We're a people of good hospitality, and we just, we didn't have our perspective straight. Sorry about that. Please forgive us, blah, 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 blah. And so it's clear that because he's so powerful, they want to use him to train their fighters and to have him on their side, and that will help them to be more powerful. And that this isn't about like justice or like, in terms of like the law applies to everyone equally. Now that he has something to offer the society is interested in treating him with human dignity. And he's not excited about it. At the same time, the investigation back in Ashoka of the knife has revealed that some of the members of the city council who Rook's family is constantly trying to get them to reverse his sentencing of exile. One of those guys is actually a servant of Suraith. And so he's like, a straight up traitor. And he also has access to the withering knife. And so he's one of these murderers who's been going around killing people with the knife, and he has voices in his head because of it. And that's pretty bad. At the same time, Rook's father writes a letter to Rook, kind of letting him know, hey, we're trying to get you back to Ashoka and iron out all of these problems so that you can rejoin your family and society and all of that stuff. But in the meantime, since you can't do that and you're out there on the other side of the wilderness, there is like a hidden secret treasure out there. And if you have time, you should try and go and find it. And so when Rook gets this letter about this hidden treasure of a book that is written by what they call the first father, who was the father of Suraith back when she was a human, and is in many ways like the founder of the human culture and also the shared culture that the monsters have with the humans. This guy was like basically kind of like a supernatural saint type character. He is the one, it ends up, who established the oases. He taught humanity how to use their magical powers to enhance their abilities so that society could be defended and rebuilt. And so he's kind of the foundation of the entire culture. That guy wrote a book about his experiences, and this book can be found in this like dungeon. And Rook's father feels like Rook could recover the book, and that would be great. And so Rook is like, hey, I won this competition, but listen, you people suck, and I'm not interested in being a part of your culture, so I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go find this book that my dad said is important. And Jazeera also leaves with him, and he's like, I don't want you to leave with me. That's going to ruin your life, and I've made this choice about how you should live your life, and you should respect it. And Jazeera is not happy about that at all, and tells him that she'll do whatever she wants to do, and that anyway, she's not even engaged to her jerk of a fiance anymore anyway. So she can go on a trip if she wants to. And that's what she does. She accompanies Rook, and they fight for a while, but then because they've gotten back away from society and all of the pressure that is on them to be in conformity with the rules of their different societies, they can just kind of relax and be who they really are. And now that she's not involved with anybody, they can give in to their attraction to each other, which is basically what happens. And then they also go through this dungeon and find this book. And we also get more story from like the monster side of things. And Suraith is getting more and more powerful. And she discovers the location of Stronghold and the fact that it is not defended at all. And so this is a really bad thing, of course, right? And Rook, when he gets the book and he reads it, and not only, well, for one thing, there's nothing written in the book, like the pages are all blank, except that when Rook looks at it, a supernatural kind of miracle happens and the pages fill in. And when he reads them, he's like transported in the past through like the experience of his senses and his mind and stuff. And so he's literally kind of like embodied in the first father's experience. And he goes through the entire process of being murdered by his daughter and then letting his spirit leave his body and establishing the different oases that turn into the last bastions of human civilization, and also teaching people how to unlock their supernatural abilities to enhance their regular qualities and, overcome the hardship of this kind of post-apocalyptic situation that they're trapped in. And so he experiences all that, but it kind of like makes him catatonic. It like takes him out of commission. It's a pretty cool moment narratively, and kind of like shows a really big cost to the whole thing. At the same time, I think it kind of broadens Rook's character. And this happens to Jazeera as well in the next book, where they become a little bit more archetypal and a little bit less who they are in particular, I feel like. So Rook is very particular in who he is in the beginning of the first book. And by the end of the last book, he feels very broad and archetypal. And I think that plays into the idea that I talked about in the first book, where there's a lower bar of entry in terms of realism and sophistication to the story, where you have a character who becomes more and more broad and general as the story goes on, which I think can appeal to an audience who is less sophisticated and can feel really inspiring and cool, and leaves a lot of space for creativity in terms of the inspiration that it can bring you. So I could imagine if I was a lot younger and I read this story, I would start making up, in my head, or actually writing down fan fiction of things, like the continuing adventures of Rook Shekton after the third book ends, or some version thereof, because it becomes so broad that I think anybody can kind of project themselves and their imagination onto the character in a way that he is very particular, and it would be harder to do that at the beginning of the story. And so here in the middle part, this is where his personality is kind of being inscribed upon by the first father. And I think it broadens his personality and who he could be going forward into the next book. Because this is kind of the close of this book. And so Suraith is going to attack Stronghold, and she has hordes of armies, and she herself is like a huge supernatural presence, and it's a dire, bad situation. And so I'm just going to roll right into the third book, which is The Warrior's Penance by Davis Ashura. And Suraith attacks Stronghold and kills like most of the city in a single strike along with all of her monsters. And Rook and Jazeera have to like round up the survivors of the attack and sneak them all the way to Ashoka, his city. And so once again, we're like, it's the same structure as the last two books where there's an attack in the wilderness and then a retreating to the civilized oases. And these people all were the ones who didn't welcome Rook and feel that they have this pride about the purebloods rejecting them. And so they're like, you can't reject me, I'm rejecting you, kind of chip on their shoulder. But at the same time, they've lost everything. And so they have to kind of beg for asylum from the purebloods. And so when they do get to Ashoka, there's a kind of debate about what's going to be the fate of these people. Will they be assimilated? Will they be turned out? There is so that means that like the people of Ashoka, the purebloods, are not monolithic on this whole thing. And at the same time, while Rook was away, his family successfully negotiated his sentence of exile to be overturned. And so he's allowed to come back into the city. Him and Jazeera become engaged together and then they get married. And everybody's pretty happy about that. But at the same time, these more conservative groups in Ashoka that don't want the outcasts to become assimilated into their society are conspiring to make them look bad and to get them kicked out. And at the same time, elements of that whole thing have to do with this guy who had the withering knife, Hillel Restava is his name, and he is exposed to the council, and so as a full-on traitor, a servant of Suraith, and so he escapes the city and goes to Suraith and pledges his allegiance to her, and so she comes up with a plan of how to use him, and we get more insight from, her perspective on the entire thing. One of the clues about what's really going on is that her mother and father have been talking to her this whole time, but now her father doesn't talk to her at all anymore. And it turns out that her father's spirit was mainly contained in the book that Rook found and had been like kind of dormant for this entire 2,000 years until when Rook experienced, on a supernatural level, the story of the book. That was a transference of the first father's soul, I guess, into Rook's spirit and his body. And so now he has the first father in his body along with his own soul, I guess. And so that her father is not there talking to her anymore because he is in Rook. And when Suraith shows up at Ashoka with all of her demon army to attack the city, they are out doing their festival thing again, where, like their training thing. And so the army is kind of caught flat-footed and they need to retreat really fast. And Rook covers the retreat. And this is the first time that we get a clue on what's going on with him in terms of the first father, because Suraith like directly attacks him, but he is able, because of the knowledge that the first father is feeding to him, to resist her attacks and then fight back, and he's actually able to harm her. And no one in history has been capable of that in the 2,000 years since all of this started. And so, like, the entire city sees that happen, both the casts and the outcasts, and it kind of galvanizes the city to pull together and stop, being inhospitable to the people from Stronghold, and also for the Stronghold people to kind of relax their pride, because Rook is technically a part of the Outcasts by virtue of being married to Jazeera. And so, like, everybody can kind of celebrate the miracle of Rook fighting back against Suraith and harming her. because he's kind of like has a foot in both worlds of the casts and the outcasts. And basically, like there's a lot of politicking and a lot of moving around, but the rest of the book is really about like Rook's growing abilities because of his connection more and more with the First Father, his relationship with Jazeera entering a new phase as they are husband and wife, and becoming important leaders in their society. Even though they're not very interested in doing that, they take on the responsibility of it because it's the right thing to do. And they, like I said, they just become more and more archetypal, I feel, and almost saintly, the two of them really, because they even, by the end of the book, are ascending into godhood because they obtain the withering knife and they're able to kind of purify their spirit and sacrifice themselves, which releases their spirit from their body and allows them to command a lot more magical power. And then all of that power is supplemented by the knowledge that Rook has because of the First Father. And the two of them, Rook and Jazeera, are able to combine forces and destroy Suraith. And at the same time, like throughout the course of the book, they radically change the society of both Stronghold and Ashoka. So there's like a kind of a new melting pot society happens where everybody has to like figure out a new way of being that doesn't have anything to do with the old traditions, and also includes these civilized monsters that were serving Suraith, but were also dominated by her madness and her, direct magical control over them. Now that Suraith is kind of wiped off the board, they have their own agency, and there's a faction within them that is able to has always been able to discern good from bad and is teaching the rest of the monsters to be more civilized. But, they're not monolithic and not everybody is interested in that. And so there's a lot of story potential there. And indeed, I was wondering, are these related to, these books related to other books that Davis Ashura has written? And the answer is yes, because the story, at the end of the book, there's a preview of the next book, and it's about, the continuing story of the monster culture becoming more civilized. So overall, there's a lot of interesting connections, and I think the story is really well written. But because of my own personal emergencies that happened and all of the running around I had to do during the week, I just wasn't able to kind of sink into the story in a way and appreciate it in the way that it deserved or give it my mental attention. And this is just the kind of thing that ends up happening, when you're having a hobby of reading. There's real life too, and real life, to pretend as if real life does not affect the kind of pleasure and the way that you experience a story is just not true. So I don't want to project onto the story like I had a bad time or I don't remember the details. I didn't sink into the story. It didn't grab me, but it couldn't have, because I had all of this stuff in the way of what was going on in real life. So that's not on the book, and I'll just have to come back to this trilogy at another time and hope that my life is calmer then, so that I can kind of draw out more of the symbolism and what's going on under the hood. There's a lot of stuff that I was thinking about in terms of ancient, Indian spirituality and culture, religiosity, and how it's related to this mode of storytelling and some of the allusions that are made to things. It's all really interesting, but I just didn't have the time or energy to really plunge into it and consider it deeply. So my reading and experience of the books is kind of superficial, and that's not on the book's, part. It has nothing to do with its quality. It's just a fact of what happened because of the circumstances in my personal life. So I'll be moving on to something else next week and on and on and on. And eventually I'll come back to the casts and the outcasts and hopefully have a deeper reading.